turns out, I was planning originally, when I thought about this in general terms, to say, well, we're going to budget 3 lectures for the battles. There's plenty of junk going on in the Yom Kippur War. By the time I finished writing up my remarks, when I got off the plane, I've been racing to finish this the last several days. In between my jet lag, falling asleep every day at around 6 o'clock, just collapsing, and then waking up 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning, something like, you know, death's like many of us have been there. So it's a little bit discombobulating. In the teeth of all that, I've endeavored to put together a coherent account. And I've discovered, after I finished writing up so many pages, that this whole business tonight is going to take place on more or less the 48 hours prior to the Yom Kippur War, because that is the key to the whole set of events that happens. It's not just stupid little details. A huge amount of the way the war unfolded, the reason Israel lost the war. Now you say, well, Israel didn't lose the war. Well, they didn't lose it, but they didn't win it. You know, they lost it, and both sides lost and both sides won it, if you want to be honest. If you want propaganda, you know, go somewhere else. But the bottom line is, we won and we lost, the Arabs won and the Arabs lost. And to the degree they did, it's because of unbelievable misjudgments, hubris, what we call in Hebrew, gaiva shachsanut, and other miscalculations. And if this was a sermon, there would be much to talk about in terms of human beings learning lessons from all this. But I'm going to plunge right into my material. In spite of Israel's foreknowledge of the Egyptian military plans, as I told you last time, about the new weapons, the Sagers and the SAM-6s, and the doctrine of limited advance, that the Egyptians had worked out a doable plan to just cross the canal and more or less stop there after moving a little bit in. So it's a very practical, doable plan. The Israeli army did not really develop effective combat counter strategies. Here you have 2 of the classic weapons that I'm talking about. Now, Ken Breitbart told me today that the Americans, he was involved with this, and we actually have some people here in the audience, and next week as well, and then the next couple of weeks, because we're getting closer enough to our own times that we have people, I'm serious, we have people here with institutional knowledge of some of the technical details of the military and intelligence side, but I'm speaking now about the weapons side, of what actually happened in the Yom Kippur War. Baltimore's not the smallest Jewish community in the world, and if opportunity presents itself, I will in the next couple of weeks introduce here and there 1 or 2 or 3 speakers, each one to talk for 5 minutes literally about the area of their technical expertise, which is beyond my own, because this is a war, as all modern wars are, that in which technology plays a gigantic role. But one way or the other, Israel did not deploy the counter strategies that were possible, and it's a shame. It sounds something abstract, but not if you lost a loved one because of that. Despite Israel's knowledge of Sadat's determination to actually start a war as soon as he was able, Israel analyzes this information and concludes he's not really going to do this. So in other words, what we're dealing over here is, I told you before, this master spy that Israel had, Ashraf Marwan. Somebody asked me, I gave him the book. Actually told him all the details that we discussed last time. But now we come to the wonderful, crazy area of intelligence, as I mentioned before. And it's not enough to get information, you have to assimilate it. A lot of times, it's just interesting in life. A lot of times you get info and you don't hop. If you've been in the teaching business, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. You give the information, you have to restructure what you're saying if you want the student to understand it. You have to figure something out. You can't simply say, well, I made it very clear, and this one understood and that one understood, so why don't you understand it? You know how it goes, people process, and I would refer to it perhaps an intellectual dyslexia, if you follow what I'm saying, you know, that kind of business, in which you get info but you don't see it correctly, or a lot of your own built-in prejudices prevent you from analyzing it. But the intelligence business is one in which you get the raw information and then you try to put it into a picture and properly analyze it. So you can analyze, and that's the right thing to do. However, it can go 2 ways. You can analyze it correctly or not. Analysis of raw data is what the intelligence business is all about. I mean, that's what they do at the, let's go to the next one. That's what they do at the CIA, among other places. I mean, I know in this audience and listening, we have people that work in this stuff. It's, there's the info, the data, whether electronic or otherwise, or through spies, and they got to put it together and see, is this one telling the truth? Not based on this one. These two informations contradict each other, and the popular term ever since 9/11 is connecting the dots. Right, but what does that mean? Now, this super spy, Ashraf Marwan, did keep Israel appraised of all this. By early 1973, Sadat is champing at the bit. He is firing the generals who are afraid of war, and he is replacing them with others who are not. Significant personnel challenges are going on in Egypt. He is putting in guys. He is putting on guys who say we can do it. The regular classic generals in Egypt say you can't fight against Israel and all that. They have too many advantages, and we're not ready yet. And he says, we're doing it. He's also holding secret talks with Syria for a two-front war, which is basic military logic. Because if you're going to have a war with Israel, if possible, you want it on both sides, right? Because that's always what you want to do. Wasn't the alliance against Hitler, for example? You have a two-front war, which is the nightmare, because they have to fight twice. And Israel, indeed, have to fight a two-front war, serious two-front war, in 1973, and will not actually be able to do it. They'll have to do one, and then only do the other. And therefore, if you're Israel, you ought to be able to figure, if Egypt's going to war, then it means Egypt and Syria. Right? It's not going to happen as just one country. Assad, the head of Syria, as we know, is also champing at the bit. He realizes that Syria can never fight Israel alone. I'm not sure many people have comprehended that in the last 40 years. Syria is always weaker. Looks big, and it is big, but ever since the Syrian war broke out, civil war, we realized Syria is a mosaic of a lot of different competing national groups that hate each other. You got your Sunnis, your Shiites, your Druze, and this and that and the other, Baruch Hashem. And, no question about it. As opposed to Egypt. As opposed to Egypt, with tens of millions of the same type. Egypt is the most homogeneous of all the Arab countries. Egypt is a country. Iraq is an invention. Right? Syria, an invention. Lebanon, an invention. Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, is an invention. As the world is discovering now, is gigantic areas of Saudi Arabia don't want to be under them. Egypt is not an invention. Egypt was a country thousands of years ago. So that's a real threat. Now, Syria by itself is not that strong. It's strong, but not that strong. But the two of them combined, Egypt and Syria, then you got something powerful. So the point is that Syria, if they want to fight Israel, of course they want to get their land back, is waiting for the opportunity to team up with Egypt. So hence, when Sadat indicates that he's seriously going to go to war, President Assad of Syria says, of course, count me in. However, unlike Sadat, President Assad of Syria is not willing to settle for anything less than all the Golan Heights. Here we have the phenomenon that I mentioned, which is a lot of books have been written on the Yom Kippur War. And most of them are wrong. And it's not surprising. It's only because a lot of the info only came out recently. Similarly to if you read a book 50, 60, 70 years ago about World War II, they never heard, as came out later, that the Allies had the code, right? The ultra code. Nobody knew about it. So you can write a whole big book and be, Samuel Eliot Morrison. You can win a Pulitzer Prize. All the way. You didn't know the facts. So similarly, in the accounts of the Yom Kippur War, aside from the problem of lying, which we'll deal with later, that's also in every war, but a lot of the info wasn't out. And therefore, I say this because the Arabs have not opened their records, and nobody knows really what they're thinking, but we can derive it from what we know. When Sadat says he wants to go to war, Assad said, count me in, but unlike Assad, he wants to hold Golan Heights. Now, you'll read a lot of times in the old books that are written by the Yom Kippur War, the Syrians want to break into the Galil and go and wipe out the Tiberi, all the rest of it. That actually is not true, it turns out in the end. Their plan was be sure to secure the whole of the Golan, because that's what they lost in the 67 war. Obviously, in some future date, they would like to wipe out Israel. Who wouldn't? But in the short run, this is what but they weren't ready to do a half. So the basic dissonance between the war view of Egypt and Syria is different, because Egypt has worked itself out smart enough to say like this: we can go in, conquer 2, 3, 4, 5 miles, stop, and hold it. And that's doable. And better, half a loaf, as they say. Syria said, no, we got to go and take back all the land that was lost in the 67 war. Don't you Egyptians agree with that? What kind of Arab patriots are you if you don't? So being the Middle East, they have to lie. So as a result, since he's not mentally where Assad is, I'm sorry, you know what I'm saying? The Syrian guy is not where the Egyptian guy is. So let's put it this way. He doesn't understand the basic Egyptian strategy, which is going to be a big problem for the Arabs in the war. It's one of the things that helps Israel. The Arab strategy, the Egyptian strategy is, you take a little bit, you hold it, and then that spark plugs a political process. Then you get Nixon and Kissinger involved. By the way, that was successful. Agreed? Yeah. That is what happened. After the war and the ceasefire, then Kissinger and Nixon got into it, and they made Israel get back. Now, it didn't turn out totally the way Egyptians wanted it, because by the time Jimmy Carter was finished, as we all know, they gave back everything, but they had to make a full peace treaty with Israel. Sadat's original plan was, I'll get back and I won't give. But at the end, it didn't work out the way he saw it. But a significant political process did develop, which culminated in a complete withdrawal of the Israelis from Sinai and a complete peace between Israel and Egypt. That is not where Assad was thinking then or now. The Syrians and the other Arabs, I think we know this, are not really prepared for a complete and total peace treaty with Israel. Not as a final business. And this dissonance was an important role in the war. So what do I mean when I say he lies? If the Egyptian guy reveals this true limited strategy, we call the Shazli strategy. This limited was the best Egyptian general was General Shazli, who said, go 4 or 5 miles and stop. Then the Syrians will back out. They'll denounce, they'll say Sadat's a traitor. So you have to lie. So Sadat basically does like a crooked businessman. He had 2 sets of books. He has 2 plans. One he shows the Syrians and one he shows his own guys, right? The one he shows the Syrians is the plan to conquer all of Sinai, right? So we go in and we don't stop till we get to there, and maybe even there, who knows? We go all the way. Day 1, we go here. Day 2, we get to the Gidi, Mitla, pass it on. Day 3, we go there. Day 4, we go there. It's baloney, but this is what he said. So the Syrians then think like this: just as we have a plan, and we're going to keep fighting till we get all the Golan, the Egyptians will go and keep up all the things till they get the whole Sinai. But the real plan he hides from him, like a crooked businessman. The real plan is what I told you, what they call high minarets. That was a technical secret term for it. And that's the business to go a little bit. This is not a small matter, because the lack of candor between the 2 allies bespeaks a shaky alliance, easily fissured, and such fissures would play a vastly important role in the course of the Yom Kippur War, as we shall see. It's what eventually led to Israel delivering a powerful blow to Egypt. Until then, they couldn't. Honest alliances are frank, painful, but sound. One thinks, for example, of World War II, right? Yeah, this is what's going on over here. Jake, stop this for a second. So, now I'm gonna tell you. This is a perfect example I'm talking about. Sadat lied. Now let's go to World War II. It was U.S., Britain, Russia. Stalin was having a lot of trouble in 1942, culminating in Stalingrad. And they had what they call Second Front. You ever remember that? They said, we can't fight the war. The Americans and British have to launch a Second Front, meaning they have to do D-Day in 1942. They weren't ready. But all the communists in America and in England, and all the liberals and the press, oh, we have to have a second front now. Got to do it. And Churchill and Roosevelt said, we want to do it, it's not right, I can't do it. But Roosevelt was the type of guy, if you know who he was, where in a personal conversation, it's like Sadat, he ended up agreeing with the other guy because he didn't like a scene. So when Molotov, the Russian guy, came to visit Roosevelt in early 42, went to the White House, he said, oh, we got to have a second front. Roosevelt said, no problem. Yeah, America's behind you 100%, no problem. And maybe, he thought that. We'll never know. And then Molotov went back to Russia and he said, oh, it's coming, the second front. But as time unfolded, and the generals got together and showed everybody the numbers and the amount of boats and things like that, it's not going to happen. But we already promised Stalin it's going to happen. And Stalin's already writing letters like, no, where is it? And so Churchill said like this, I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm going to Russia in August of 42, and so I'm going to tell them the news. There's no second front. It's not happening. Better to tell the painful truth than to shoot the bull. And this is the famous, what they call Moscow Conference. The public didn't know what's happening. So here you have the press playing it up. Look at this. Everything's great, wonderful. It's propaganda,
Along spacious Gorky Street, Regent Street of Moscow, sped the limousines. The few people about were unaware of the identity of the occupants. An hour and a half after the Liberator had landed, Mr. Churchill with Mr. Harriman were starting their talks with Premier Stalin.
Everything's nice and friendly.
Have corresponded freely during the past 15 months. This is the first time they had met. This initial conference lasted nearly 4 hours, business being conducted through interpreters. Nevertheless, the discussions were carried on in an atmosphere of cordiality and complete sincerity.
Yeah.
Among attributes they have in common are courage, determination, and ample qualities of leadership.
Okay, that's no. The public doesn't know. What's my point? What do you think Stalin did when they said not going to be a second front? Scream, carry on, this, that, and the other. Bunch of cowards. But then he got over the fit. And he said, okay, so what's possible? He said, well, we could do North Africa. All right, does Epizechet, So, and that's what happened. So my point is like this. If they would really lie, the thing would fall apart. You can't have an actual alliance, not long term, not to fight against Hitler, unless you're frank. Egypt and Syria don't have a history, none of the Arab countries have a history of being frank and honest with each other, Baruch Hashem. And so the result, I'm serious, so the result is that there will be a coalition, so to speak, against Israel, these two armies, which is a real problem, but they're operating on different wavelengths and different schedules. And Israel should have been able to maneuver within that better than they did, but they did this to a fair degree. Okay, now the Egyptian plan, as I told you before, is modest, and it's based on the fact that they have a lack of these long-range bombers or Scud missiles, because they're worried, if they war lasts long, Israel has these really good airplanes and stuff where they can bomb in the middle of Egypt. Now these are Russian and missiles and long-range bombers at that time, and if they have a bunch of them, then they can hit Tel Aviv. Now, ironically, just before the war, about 6 or 8 weeks before the war, the Russians suddenly gave them a whole bunch of these. And this spy, Marwan, told Israel something that shocked them, because he said they thought they had like 3 or 4 Scuds. He said, no, I got 400. And if it would have come to a situation, which it didn't, where Israel would be bombing Cairo, which didn't happen, then they would have done like Saddam Hussein did 20 years later when he bombed Tel Aviv and all the cities of Israel. Even as it is, this is unbelievable. This only came out very recently. Even as it is, at the very beginning of the war, Israel didn't know this thing. They shot 2 missiles. Actually, had 2 planes that were able to shoot missiles from a distance at the Pentagon of Israel, at the Kiryat in Tel Aviv. So that if it would have succeeded, one big missile would hit and blow up the whole Israeli high command. and they weren't even prepared for it. And I'm sure they'll make a movie of this one day, because this spy told them about this. So when they saw two planes at the very beginning of the war flying towards Tel Aviv, the planes went after them, but they got orders, don't go after the planes, go after the missiles. And they launched these two missiles towards the Pentagon. One fell in the water, and the other one was shot out by the Israeli pilot. So that sounds like a movie, okay? And what it says like this, made a big splash right outside Tel Aviv. So it really was like a movie. Another minute, and forget it. Can you imagine? You have Moshe Dayan, everybody all in there. It'd be quite a business. So Israel didn't know. This is part of what had the fog of war. Usually, people do not really know what the other side has. That's what makes everybody scared about war with North Korea. Who knows what they really got? You know, they say, well, the CIA said this. I know what the CIA said, but who's what they really got? So this is how it works. Now, meanwhile, though, in a month or two before that, if Israel bombs the Egyptian interior, there's no countermeasure, no Egyptian deterrence other than Soviet threats. A week before Pesach of 73, Sadat tells his cabinet, guys, this is happening. We're getting the fancy Russian weapons very soon that we need, the Sagers, the Sam-6s and all that. And we're going to go to war on Pesach. Assad, however, says, Syria's not ready. Egypt got all the weapons. We didn't get all the weapons yet. We've not received from the Russians the necessary SAM-6s. And without them, we can't have a war because our tanks will be bombed by the Israeli Air Force. You have the Golan Heights, the Syrians on the other side. They want to send in thousands, hundreds of tanks. Israel will bomb them. The only countermeasure is to have SAM-6s right up against the border so that they cover the whole area of the Golan, which is not that big, and any Israeli Air Force plane they'll go up there, they can shoot them down, which did happen. Israel lose hundreds of planes, dozens of planes that way. But they weren't ready yet on Pesach. All this means that Egypt was planning to attack in April and May, but in the end they had to call it off until the Syrians are ready. Now, I'm doing hindsight, but that's what history is. In other words, they had to push it off from Pesach to Yom Kippur. Ashraf Marwan has told all this to the Mossad. That means that in the weeks up to Pesach, Israel had been expecting an attack, but it didn't happen in the end. Marwan explained to them what was happening along the way, just as I explained to you. They said, we're ready to go, but then the Syrians said at the last minute, no, has to be a delay. But here's where the human element, I'm sorry to say, in intelligence analysis enters the picture to Israel's detriment. Although Ashraf Marwan was explaining the on and off process, the military process, since he gave the actual specific war plans in detail, I don't think most of you have an idea, you can't, how detailed all this. He says it's going to be 3 divisions, this one's going to land here, and 3 hours later it's going to be here, and this brigade is going to do this. He gave him unbelievable information. Israel freaked out over the original reports of a war taking place right on or right after Pesach. The Israeli army cranked up mentally for the war in this spring. When he reported that the war was going to be put off for a couple weeks, okay, so let's say Shavuos. And then he said it was being put off again for another couple weeks because Brezhnev came to visit Nixon. They didn't want to do it in the middle of the summit. And the Israelis began to feel what? He's crying wolf. Every time he says it doesn't happen. Now really he was not. Agreed? Everything he said happened. It really happened that they were going to do Pesach, and then they switched it to Shavuos, and then they switched it to something else, and then they switched it to Yom Kippur. But it's easy for me to say today, and you, because we know the tragic results. At that time, the intelligence analysts will say, this is a pattern of baloney. The Israeli intelligence, I'm talking about the army intelligence, already angry at their non-control of this Mossad asset. They did not like the fact that the Mossad is the one who's dealing with him. See, this is also part of the bureaucracy of the intelligence business, which is just the way the beast is, but is always causing a problem. You have it in America, you have it in Russia, you have it everywhere. To use your terminology, it's military intelligence, and you got the CIA. Well, what do you mean? They're both doing the same thing, they're all spying. And it's a good question. And so they always have to divide and redivide and say, oh, no, CIA does this, the NSA does that, the military does that. That's fine when it works. But a lot of times, in the history of intelligence, they like cross over, and the one gets angry at the other or jealous of the other. I'll tell you again, even the Soviet Union has had this, so, and they're very good. So Israel also, if you want to find out what another country is doing militarily, so in Israel they have Agaf Modi'in, they have the military intelligence. Fine. So they make their spies and they get their information, all the rest of it. So what the heck is the Mossad for? A James Bond movie? What's it there for? You understand? They're already doing it. So, and the technical term is Mossad, I forget the term, for special missions. You know, in other words, it's amorphous. What exactly is your role? It just so happens that in the movies, everybody's heard of the Mossad. And that, no, I'm very serious about this. So Ashraf Marwan is an Arab, he heard of the Mossad. Because he watched James Bond, so he figures, is Israel James Bond? That's really what happened. And so he comes to London in 1970, and he says, I want to contact the Mossad. You follow? And they're the ones dealing with him. And they said, we want to introduce you to other people. No, I don't want to talk to anybody, I just want to talk to you. And they don't control him. He's a big shot in Egypt. They're lucky to have anything from him. So even though according to normal procedures, you should be vetted and meet this specialist, and now I'm not talking to anybody, I'm only talking to this guy. This guy Doobie, you know? I'm only talking to him. So what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You can't shoot the golden goose. So that's how it turned out. Well, I get it. And looking back in retrospect, the information you got was 100% accurate. But if you're a member of another intelligence branch, you say, this is not following procedure. And I cop. And this is not according to anything. And, you know, how do we know the information is correct and all the rest of it? And we want to meet them ourselves, and it doesn't happen. So this poisoned the atmosphere, unfortunately, of somebody who was a top-level information source. And what was the result? They became skeptical of his information. Because every time you say Saddam is going to attack, then you say he changed his mind. This is becoming ridiculous. That was the opinion of the guy before this, of this guy, who's a big criminal in all this stuff, caused a lot of trouble. And he just took this attitude that I'm describing to you now, which is bureaucratic in the end of the day, and that is the other side, the other group controls him. I don't know if we can trust what he says and all the rest of it. The reason I'm doing like this in my hands is, you're not talking about a little business, you're talking about possibility of war. You don't get, what's the right word, jealous and possessive and territorial when it's a question of national, war. If the U.S., I mean, I would hope, I don't know how it works in this country, but I hope if the CIA, the DIA, the SMIA, they all get, somebody gets something that says the North Koreans are going to attack tomorrow. I hope somebody doesn't say, I guess, well, I don't believe it because he's in the other group. But that's what happened in Israel. Marwan says, look, everything I told you is true. I can't help it if Sadat keeps delaying for one reason or another. All I know is an attack is coming. I just tell what I know. The military intelligence, these guys, they say, our analysis indicates that Marwan may believe this, but we do not. We're not saying he's a liar. We're saying he's persuaded himself that this is the way it is, but we don't believe that this is true. Now, General Zaira, the military intelligence, his skepticism is very good, comfortable for the decision makers. It's good for the economy. He's the man of cool nerves on a shining horse, because Golda Meir and Pinchas Apir are trying to hold the economy. Israel has enough trouble with the balance of payments. The economy was already going down, as I described last year, and because of increasing consumer spending. So the last thing they need is another 50, 60 million bucks on a false alarm. You get it? Now this is a dangerous business because the military does cost a lot of money, but look at the risk. So here's the deadly drug. Suppose there was a false alarm, and I was in charge, and I did not lose my nerve, and then the whole alarm passed. I said, look, I saved you 50 million bucks. You all going to lose your head? But I was the one who didn't lose my head, and I evaluate everything very rationally, very cool. As a result, we never had a problem, and we saved a ton of money. That's like gambling addiction, you get it? It works once or twice, except when it doesn't work. And that's what happened with Israel. Okay? So this guy, everybody said, he's great. The Mossad wasn't sure. They said, we think the guy's real. But what we call in America the national intelligence estimate was from the military intelligence. They're the ones who give the haracha, they give the final military evaluation of what the security situation is. So I hope I'm not losing you in all the bureaucracy, but I can't help it. That's what happened. Now, what all this means is that all through the months of 1973, President of Egypt, Sadat, was publicly massing troops and the infrastructure of war, publicly calling them maneuvers. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of personnel and equipment and who knows what moving up. The Israeli army could see this, but if it's not going to end in an attack, then Israel's not going to respond. I mean, at any time during 73, the Israeli Air Force could have bombed them like they did in 67. They're juicy, fat targets that the Egyptian concentrations were. You have to understand what I'm talking about. Imagine a column of trucks and tanks stretching from Cairo to the Suez Canal in one long line, because if you're moving divisions and armies, which is what they're doing, that's what you have. So from the Air Force, it's perfect. You know what I mean? They could just woo. And Israel knows how to do that. But you understand what I'm saying. It's 1973, not 67, and Israel's dependence on the USA and on the West is very strong, unfortunately. Golda Meir has had to fight very hard to keep Nixon on Israel's side, as opposed to the State Department, as we've seen. Nixon had been pressing Israel for some peace plan. Any plan that Golda is comfortable with that involves Israel withdrawal somewhere. That's all Nixon wants. That's pretty much been the American policy of every president. This is particularly true by 1973, after Nixon's big re-election. He was determined to solve the Middle East in his second term, and the only way to do that was by twisting Israel's arm for its own good to withdraw. This has been every president I know of in second term. Okay? And by the way, they don't mean bad. You could say Nixon meant in a bad way, but he also meant in a good way. I mean, he was a weird guy. But really, after all the Nixon bashing is over, didn't mean it bad. The people say like this: how long is the Arab-Israeli conflict going to go on? It's ridiculous. We all know where the end is. It has to be some kind of Israeli withdrawal over here, and the Arabs have to, agree to a peace. From Nixon's point of view, or Carter, or Reagan, or any Bush, or anybody, they say like this: listen, we will back Israel to the degree that you don't have to pull out until you get a real peace treaty like Sadat did. But then you got to do it, right? Israel has to always jump ahead and say, well, we can't put ourselves, that the PLO will be 2 miles away from Tel Aviv with missiles. You know what I mean? Like the Hamas is today to Hezbollah. But that's something people didn't get. So this is a problem that lasts till Trump, right? It doesn't go away. You want Israel to withdraw, you want a real peace. What about the fact that you can't guarantee the peace once it withdraws? Then you go like that. If you're the Secretary of State, you say, listen, we got to try something. What's the alternative? Nothing? Like that. So life is strange. In such a climate, I can tell you right now, so by 73, especially in the early months, Richard Nixon was, those White House tapes, right? He always was ranting and raving. The Jewish lobby's out to, prevent me from solving the Arab-Israeli problem, and the Israelis have been playing this for years, and they're screaming with Kissinger and all the rest of it. But really, like I said before, if you know who Nixon is, the ranting and raving wasn't really who he was. Really what he said was like this: he said, we want to finally put an end to this whole business. You, Golda Meir, tell me what you're comfortable with, and we'll go with it. But it can't be that you want to withdraw from nothing. Now, Golda Meir wanted to withdraw from nothing. We've talked about that in the past. That's how she saw it. But I'm saying this all because if it's 73 and the Arabs are building up the war machine and they're constantly training troops, all the rest of it, Israel is in an unfortunate situation in which they felt, at least, they can't be looked as being aggressive in any way. So that meant that they couldn't take out these concentrations of enemy forces as they're massing, and that's when the other side is the most vulnerable. So in such a climate, Israel cannot be afforded to see it as an aggressor, even though objectively it was the right thing to do, like a Frederick the Great. If you know your history, European history, that's how Frederick won all the wars. If the other side was building up, he said, I'm not waiting for you to start. Why should you get to start? Stop building up. If you are building up, I'll take you out. That's how he won all the wars. So the point's like this: is he the aggressor? That's what he said. I'm the aggressor. You're the one who's building up to get ready against me. So to use a modern example, if I saw you pulling out a shotgun and little by little loading up the bullets, all the rest of what am I supposed to wait till you pick it up and point it at me? But I got to do that. But you know how that goes. From the point of view of the cop, as you stand over the dead body, he said he was going to shoot me. He said, well, what's the evidence he was going to shoot you? You know what I mean? So this was the bad spot in Israel found itself in. LBJ, as we saw, had permitted Israel to go do so in 1967. And that was exactly the case. After he spoke with Abe Fortas, and his other objective Jewish advisors on the Middle East situation. But nevertheless, Nixon wasn't going to do that. They didn't feel it. And so Israel was in a real tough spot. And they were about to be really subjected to a lot of pressure from the American government. Nixon was holding secret conversations with the head of Pepsi Cola, Kendall, who was very tight with the Arabs. There was a whole business going on. There were multiple sets of secret conversations going on in the first half of 1973. Kissinger was having secret talks with Sadat's national security advisor, Fahmy. All kinds of things were happening away from the public. By the way, things like that are happening as we speak. Agreed? Trump's advisors, I don't care if they're Jewish or not, are having secret talks. We don't know what's going on, but you follow the news as I do. And, serious conversations are being held. Here's where divine providence kicks in, because the situation would have unfolded however it would have unfolded, but then two important modifying events came in. Number one, the Watergate. So all of a sudden, Nixon found himself with this. We all remember this, right? The Watergate hearings. And all of a sudden, instead of being a very powerful president, triumphantly reelected by carrying every state, except Massachusetts, which is not really a state. He said he says, and coming in, with a huge power, Nixon found himself politically emasculated, right? In other words, all of a sudden, he was not so powerful, and he didn't have the time, really, as the year unfolded, to really put the pressure on Israel. Secondly, I'm just saying, you can view events as coincidental, but it's kind of strange that just before the Yom Kippur War, Watergate hit. It's interesting, right? The Watergate will be an important factor in how America acts in the Yom Kippur War. It wasn't a regular war like the 67 and 56 where you had a regular president. You had Nixon fighting the Watergate, which of course took him down in the end, did it not? Secondly, the other very important event, 5 days before Rosh Hashanah, 2 weeks before Yom Kippur, first Jewish Secretary of State. Right? Kissinger, unprecedented, that's right. He becomes Secretary of State. Well, here you have it. Just 25th of Elul, how's that? Which is Bria Olam.
Mr. Chief Justice, Mr. Secretary of State, members of the Cabinet, members of the House and the Senate, and all of our other distinguished guests, I know all of you will want to hear from the new Secretary of State speaking for the first time in that capacity. And my remarks, therefore, will be brief before presenting him to you. First, I am aware of the fact that during the process of his hearings that you have learned much about him that perhaps you have not known before. But certainly, during the process of his hearings, you learned that here is a man who has the poise, the strength, the character to serve in this great position, and that he can handle himself under considerable fire.
In achieving a structure of peace under your leadership, Mr. President, we will strive not just for a pragmatic solution.
It's Rabbi Newberger.
To this or that difficult. But to
All right, take it's enough.
that America has never.
All right. Now, how's this? Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
It works? Okay.
No. Yeah.
Okay. So this is not a small event. Let me say this. We have 40 years perspective. I think, and I'll talk about this later, I hope, in the series. I'll speak about myself, and maybe for some of you. When Kissinger was there, we looked at it one way. You look back 40 years later, we look at it a different way. That's my opinion. At that time, I think many of us felt like this. Kissinger's anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. And Israel, they felt that way after the war, and we'll talk all about that. Not really. What I mean to say is, based on the information that's come out ever since then, and the records, and even the phone conversations, and all the sorts of information that we know after 40 years, that's a long time of perspective, and a lot of stuff will come out. Kissinger was the most pro-Israel Secretary of State, guy in charge of the State Department you're going to find until the Reagan era. He obviously was a very conflicted sort of guy. That's an understatement. But having said all that, and although he was committed to the American position, as all presidents, all secretaries of states are, including Jared Kushner, don't fool yourself, that there's got to be some kind of Israeli withdrawal in exchange for a peace. Having said that, he was more considerate of the Israeli position of Golda Meir, personally, than William Rogers and these other normal diplomats would have been. So you can say that it's simply a coincidence that on the eve of the Yom Kippur War, 2 weeks, right? 1 week for Rosh Hashanah, so 2 weeks or so before Yom Kippur, you get a Jewish guy in charge now of all American policy, because Kissinger was extraordinary in wearing two hats. He was Secretary of State and he was the National Security Advisor. We haven't had anybody like that. You hear what I just said? So that's Nixon. Nixon liked to operate this way. He said, I want to deal with one guy and that's it. And so happened, I mean, I'm simplifying, but it's good enough for us. He says it's because it's very complex bureaucratic business. But I just want to deal with one person. So you handle all the, the CIA stuff and the Defense stuff, information stuff, and the State Department stuff, and the national security stuff, and I just want to deal with you. So the one voice that Nixon is listening to, Erev Yom Kippur almost, and the guy who will be in the position of command authority unlike any other national security official in American history, is going to be a Jew who came to this country, running away from Hitler, who lost family over there, who understands what Israel is. He's not exactly a guy you want for your rabbi. He's about to marry somebody who's not Jewish. All that is true. Right? All that's true. But nevertheless, you have someone who cannot help but by his personal history understand that when Israel is attacked as they are in Yom Kippur War, this is a pekuach nefesh, as we call it. You understand? In a way that others wouldn't see. In a way that perhaps I think Richard Nixon wouldn't have seen, but I might be wrong about that as the story will unfold. So just on a human level, I find it to be a very fascinating kind of story. But it's a very significant event. Therefore, do you really believe in coincidence? But meanwhile, let's go back to Israel where they're screwing up. Although the military intelligence discounts what their advisor said, Ashraf Mawanda spy, and doesn't believe in the approach of war, this is sad. We're talking about 2 weeks before Yom Kippur, and the Israelis are in la-la land. It's not happening. Others are less certain. To them, there is at least a distinct possibility that war might break out in a two-front war. In other words, not everybody in Israel is stupid. Only, unfortunately, the people who counted were stupid. That's sad. Accordingly, Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister, and his generals do some pre-positioning of forces near the two front lines just in case there's a war. We call low-level preparation, very important stuff. We're talking about the whole of the Tzava Keva, the standing army. You know how it works. They have a regular army, and then they have the reserves. So they do put the regular army into the Sinai in forward positions and in the Golan, but they don't call up the reserves. We're talking about logistical infrastructure without which an army cannot function. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks before Yom Kippur, they say, let's fix the roads, let's bring in gas, let's make sure that there's ammunition where it should be. Are the hospitals set up in case we have to set them up right away? Who's bringing the food? Things like that are absolutely necessary. Not for a gigantic army, but at least for something. So if they hadn't done that, Israel would literally be nothing This is of cardinal importance, because what I'm telling you is, Israel is caught with its pants down on Yom Kippur, but at least had the pants on. And otherwise, they wouldn't have had that. Trouble was, as the months pass, and winter is approaching, now you know and I know, they ended up attacking Yom Kippur. But you know and I know, everybody's in Israel, that's just before the rain. Agreed? What's the halacha about the talamotar? Right? It's just before the bad season hits. So the Arabs attack, you say a stroke of genius. The Arabs attack at the last moment, they can actually do that. Because wait another couple weeks, and you can't have war anymore. Maybe in the Sinai possibly, but not in the Golan. Because the rain and the mush and the mud and all the rest of it mess up your plans and frustrate your ability to operate in that mushy, volcanoous area because you're a general and you don't know, up there it can snow like overnight. And so Lamaisa, there's no wars in the winter, not in the north. And so, if you're Moshe Dayan and the others say, woo, it's soon going to be Rosh Hashanah, doesn't mean Yom Kippur, by the end of Sukkot, we can be pretty sure it's not going to happen, not going to be a two-front war. If it's not going to be a two-front war, it's not going to be any war because they're not going to have a one-front war. You follow? And so, in the event, as I told you before, the war started the last possible minute. In early October, a few weeks later, we've been too late. So it's understandable that the Israelis started to say, okay, another year, made it, almost another year, then we're safe till the spring of 74. Because of this feeling, Israel does not react. As September and October go by, when Egypt and Syria installed an unprecedentedly dense cluster of missiles, the SAM-6s, and they massed unprecedentedly large numbers of soldiers on the two borders, because they say it's a bluff. It's almost winter. They're going to go back to rear positions very soon until the spring. So this is sad. At least on the Golan, however, the Israeli General Chofi, felt differently. Because he's there and he's looking. And if you eyeball the gigantic buildup during Elul, if you're actually physically there, and some of us have been in the Golan, you know what I'm talking about. You can see from very far away. You smell a rat. The Syrians are planning an attack. You just see another column and this, and that, and the other, like, what's going on over here? So you see, there's it in the intelligence business. You get a report and you analyze it, antiseptically. You're there and you say, this is, something crazy. If Israel mobilized its reserves, then it could put 500 or more tanks on the Golan. The Syrians would eventually attack with around 1,000, 900, but the Israeli qualitative superiority could destroy the advancing tanks even without the Air Force interfering. I'm going to play what if for a second. What if Israel had mobilized its reserves in the north and brought up all the tanks that they need and pre-positioned them in the right places because they had these ditches and covered defensive positions? It's a shooting gallery. The Syrians, let's say they have 500. The Syrians would come with 1,000, even more. You just pick them off. The Israelis were that good. They had high training, a lot of practice, especially target practice. The defensive positions were good. The Golan, as you and I know, we've been there, full of hills and depressions. So if you position everything right, the other tanks have to come down there. And if you got 500, so if each one takes 2, it's over. You see what I'm saying? Even if they have 1,500, which is the totality of Syrian tanks, if you have 500, you can do it. But Israel did not do this. Since the military intelligence was sure that the Syrians would not dare attack because they're afraid of the Air Force, even though the Israeli Air Force is now neutralized by the missiles, I hope I haven't confused you, the Israeli high command said we're not going to pull up the reserves. And so instead of 500 tanks, you got 77. 75 tanks against 500, that's a different story. That's the movies already. That, in real life, that's too much, obviously. It's too much. Especially at 75 tanks, the whole Golan, so all you have to do is the Syrians just go through the holes. You know what I mean? You can't cover the whole area like that. So it's very sad. This was crazy. And General Chofi went to Moshe Dayan on Erev Rosh Hashanah. He said, this is nuts. You can't, it's too much. Please send me some more tanks. Now they like him because Kofi was the old school. He grew up at the Palmach. All these generals still in the 73 were in their last, what's the right word? The last ball game, whatever the expression is. And what's that? Yeah, well, whatever. So he says, and they won, so they knew each other for decades. And so he says, I'll give you some tanks, make you feel good. And it is an unusual situation with the Syrians moving up there. Bottom line, I'll give you 100 tanks. Okay? Give them 7th Armored Division, and 7th Armored Brigade, which is a crack brigade. And they said, I guess, we'll transfer them out of the Sinai. They're facing Egypt and schlep it up to the Golan Heights. So against 500, 1,000 tanks, you have 177. Better than 77, not enough. The 7th Brigade would be very important. It's basically they're the oldest armored brigade and the best. And nothing happens overnight. If you transfer from the Sinai, you have to schlep them all the way up there. They will arrive on the battlefield 2 hours before the attack. So you believe in coincidence, right? They were in charge of the northern part. Just figure north, middle, central, A, B, C. They're in charge of A. So there would have been nobody in there but the sector of A, right? And they'll have a hell of a time. It's a very tough battle, but they were very good. The commander is let me put it this way. Their general was one who believed the worst happening. He didn't believe what everybody else was telling him about, General Bengal, who's from the Yaldei Tehran. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Remember those kids in the Holocaust who were able to escape from Poland, from families, and they ended up going to Russia, and then they ended up in Tehran, and that was all the fights between the secular and the religious. The secular Zionists, I won't say kidnapped, but they kidnapped them, and they gave like 10% to the Frum, and they kept 90% for themselves, put on kibbutz and things like this. It's a well-known dark episode in the religious Chiloni relationships, because they really stabbed the religious in the back. He's one of the kids from the Frum family. He was brought to a secular kibbutz. He grew up like that and became a big general in the army, right? And now in Yom Kippur, he's going to play some Yom Kippur. He's not going to fast, but he's going to fight. Now, therefore, it'll be 177 versus 1,000, roughly. How can I tell you? That's stupidly overconfident. How could the Israeli generals have done that? Now, again, it's easy for me to stand here in hindsight, but that's what I'm doing. In spite of the caution, the praiseworthy caution of his general, Chafi, I won't say he was really ready for the Syrian attack, because the G2, the intelligence keep telling him it's not happening. When the attack will happen on Shabbos afternoon, Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, he will not be able to assimilate the information. It's a full-scale war. Okay? He will crack under the pressure, even though he was a very good general. And he won't understand. He'll say it can't be a full war. And all of this, therefore, brings us to Rosh Hashanah of 1973, when you have the weird reality of a giant buildup in the Suez Canal and the Golan Heights, tens of thousands of men, vast quantities of equipment, dense masses of SAM-6 missiles, canceling of leaves, all the things they do on Erev D-Day of 1944, a vast armada of boats and rafts in which thousands are constantly practicing canal crossing. I mean, if you're Israel, let's go to the next one. If you're Israel, okay, then what do you call it? Then you look at the other side. It's like the Germans looking at the Allies building up on D-Day. Like, what is this? Okay? And Israel has skeleton forces and makes no move to prepare for an attack, and so you have a state of denial of an extreme decree. And you know this mentality. You all lost your cool, and you saw all this, but I knew all the time was a bluff. And when it's all over, you'll see I saved you millions of dollars. This is what it is. In the north, by the way, right? In the north, if you're up there, you can see everything from Har Chemon and Har Bental. I was there not long ago, as you can see. By the way, if I had time, I'll give you a video. We went up there, and this is not the border, this is the current border. You can see all the way out there. I was there in June with the kids. There's a war going on below me. Rivka has a video. It's boom, bang, bang. And, you look down on the flat area right in front of Kenetra, the two sides were killing each other. It's incredible. So my point is like this: Israel is unbelievable observation post. So if you're up there, you say, "What's going on? This is not a maneuvers. They're massing so many soldiers. They're bringing up so much heavy weapons. They're positioning themselves, deploying for an attack. They're putting the missiles in there. How can anybody deny that this is, a real?" And Golda Meir was even wondering. She says, "Really, with all this?" She says to the military intelligence, "Are you sure there's no danger on Rosh Hashanah?" And they say, yeah, don't worry, it'll dissipate very soon. It's going to be Yom Kippur, it'll be Sukkot, and then the rains come in, and then we're fine. To top it off, 2 days before Rosh Hashanah, King Hussein tells Golda Meir there's a surprise attack coming. All right? It's a famous episode you'll see in a second. I'll explain it for you, and then I hope the video works. He said, but if it doesn't, it's fine. Consider the position of King Hussein. He has spies also. So some of his spies were Syrian generals, because it's a matter of payoff. So, like Baltimore. So the point is that they said, the Syrians said there's going to be a war. King Hussein was like, it's going to be a war. Last time was a war in 1967. I was schlepped in, and I lost more than anybody else, the whole West Bank. There's going to be a war this time. They're going to ask me to get schlepped in. The Israelis will blow up Jordan, and we're actually friends, meaning I got nothing against Israel now, and Israel doesn't want to fight me, so I'm not going to stick my head into a place where I get blown up. So from Jordan's narrow point of view, the best thing will be like this. Israel will be ready for the war. It'll be over in a day or two, and Jordan won't be affected. You get it? From his point of view, it's a funny world, isn't it? It's a funny world. She says, let the Syrians come in, get creamed on day one. By day two, it's over. And in Jordan, it's, chai v'kayim. And same thing with the Suez Canal front. So you can't get better than this. An Arab leader who's in the know, personally helicopters to Israel and lands in the Mossad headquarters. It's not the first time he's there. See, there was a lot of secret talks between them. Look, I want to tell you something. The Arab world is a funny world. King Hussein is perfectly safe in Israel. Agreed? All joking aside. Agreed? Yeah. That's not where his problem is. When his plane or helicopter comes to Israel, they're not going to shoot him down. The Arabs are the problem. If you read his autobiography that he wrote in 1963, entitled, after Shakespeare, Uneasy Lies the Head, because Shakespeare's king says, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown, remember? So he says he was a pilot, and he flew, and all of a sudden a bunch of Syrian airplanes that bushwhacked him and wanted to shoot him down, like in 1961. And he had to fly into Israel, you understand? And the Israeli Air Force that protected him. So, this is the middle, even today, if the king of Jordan now, wants to run Israel, they're not a danger to him. You get it? The Arabs are the danger. So he flies to Israel, and he tells Golda Meir, he says, listen, baby, it's coming any minute. You better get ready. They don't believe him. Can't get better. Let's see if it works.
Now, the presidents of Egypt and Syria also set out to deceive their fellow Arab, Jordan's King Hussein. They claimed Israel was about to attack them.
Said and Assad were worried about an attack on Syria that could have one of its hooks come through northern Jordan. And the final analysis, I assured them that as far as we were concerned, no one is going to use our country to attack anyone.
King Hussein smelled a rat. The last time Egypt and Syria had maneuvered him into a war with Israel, he had ended up losing a large slice of his kingdom. So he flew off alone, telling no one he was going to meet Golda Meir.
I was very concerned and worried that a state of no peace and no war was going to end us up in a serious difficulty.
King Hussein talked about only one thing.
he warned us to expect an attack from Syria and Egypt. The Prime Minister received the king alone, but the head of Israeli military intelligence was listening as Hussein warned of the Syrian-Egyptian preparations for war. She was not convinced this information was reliable. You see, King Hussein himself was not 100% sure. Instead of mobilizing the Israeli reserves, Golda Meir kept in place the usual 450 troops along the coast.
You know, so I mean, by the way, King Hussein was shooting the bull there. What's he going to say? I helped Israel because I wanted the Arabs to get defeated, you know. So he had to rephrase it. But you understand what's going on over here. In spite of everything, General Ze'ira, the military intelligence chief, which is the authoritative decider in a well-organized bureaucratic structure, pronounces no attack coming. I know King Hussein believes it. I know Ashram Marwah believes it. They're wrong. Right? In the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, after Rosh Hashanah, the Israeli troops who were on the front lines, on the canal and in the Golan, they can see what's about to happen. But their opinion is only based on good common sense. And it doesn't count to the analysts at the headquarters. No, it's worse. Because now Israel has a Dreyfus affair. There was an officer, Iraqi Jew, named Bar Simon Tov, Benjamin Bar Simon Tov, who was an intelligence officer in the Israeli army. He says, it's going to be attacked. You're all wrong. He is ordered to shut up, and he didn't. So, wait a minute. They're so angry that he says, I'm just giving my opinion. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving my opinion. Because his opinion doesn't conform to what the superior said, and this is supposed to be usher in the intelligence business, but this is what it is. Because, my opinion, they put him under arrest. Wait, I'm not finished. He's supposed to go to jail tomorrow. Tomorrow is Yom Kippur. The day he's supposed to be arrested, the Arabs attack. Now you say like this, well, then he's vindicated. They put it off till the war's over. When the war's over, they arrest him and put him in jail. So that's a Dreyfus, that's a corrupt system. You understand? In other words, rather than admit that they were wrong and you were right, rather than admit that this one was vindicated by the events, it's literally like Dreyfus. They were willing to put him on a devil's island, the Israeli equivalent, to shut him up and to punish him for having the chutzpah to go against the big shots. So that's a deep corruption in the system. Do you understand? This is sad. This is a deep corruption in the system. The Yom Kippur War exposes a lot of real defects, serious defects in the Israeli military system. It's what it is. What you have, therefore, is a great deal, let's go to the next one, of what you can call lying, hubris, and prevarication. I just got this off Dar Sheva, the military historian Yitzchaki, who's now doing a lot of research on what really happened in the Yom Kippur War, and he was an officer, intelligence officer at that time. So he's describing over here additional details from, well, I don't want to give you all the details, but look what he says over here. After a whole generation, now we can tell the truth. That's the bottom line. And he says over here, the problem is that the problem that led to the destruction in the Yom Kippur War were deeper than simply the fact that they had the wrong conception. You understand? Based on what he took, this guy personally did a lot of interviews immediately after the Yom Kippur War as an army officer. He said that after the brilliant victory of the 6th Day War, everybody was drunk with victory and they were arrogant. You understand? Nobody was willing in the aftermath of 67, it's a long article, to listen to any criticism of what went wrong in the 67 war. He said he went to General Tal, and he went to Dayan, he went to Sharona, and they said, listen, this is for your good, correct? This is for your good. Israel won a victory, this is what you did right, this is what you did wrong. They said, we don't want to hear it, we didn't do anything wrong. Look at the victory we won. And because of that, that's a mindset, you get it? So if you can't take any kind of criticism, you take that personal, then where's it going to lead? You understand? 3 months after the war, I was appointed in charge of a special army unit after the 67 war to find out the lessons, hafakat l'chakim. Let's find out what we did wrong. And I got 12 officers working under me, who were senior officers, and when we came there and we saw that there were a lot of problems in the Torah Tabitachon, in the doctrine of the army, and there were some basic mistakes that were made in the 67 war. When we get out of this, they said, "Anachim ba'abalim atamoch, shamnam ha'ilukuyim al nitakein, nitkan v'ganzu et haduach." He prepared all these reports for the army. They were buried, archived. So it means already in 67, you had a deep corruption and the culture of the high command of the Israeli army, which was covered up by the brilliant victory of 67, which had a lot to do with the Arab screw-ups, as I told you last year, right? With the Arab screw-ups, as much as the Israeli success. I'm only mentioning this because all this came home to roost in 73. And again, it's not a matter of trying to besmirch anybody. Thousands got killed and hurt because of these attitudes. So it is what it is. As we shall soon see, the story of the Israeli army in the Yom Kippur War is a matter of screw-ups by the high command, the generals, and heroism by the lower officers. Again and again, in the north and in the south, the big shots make bad mistakes, and the majors and the captains and the lieutenant colonels are up on the front lines. They, with their lives often, or their limbs, rescue the situation. It's quite a story. After the war, the high officers will lie, and lie, and lie. They will rewrite documents. They will tamper with the evidence. It's really sad. That's why I say you can't trust the old books, because a lot of them are written by people based on faulty documents or what they rewrote themselves. And it is what it is. Here, this is, I wanted to do one thing here. No, I'll just leave that as it is. It's just more of what I said before. After the war, no, I'll show you the next one. After the war, General Kofi, who was really responsible also for a lot of his mistakes, he said everybody else was wrong, and the army was in a corrupt state. And look what he says over here. The army grew too fast, and they invented new ranks, and this caused all kind of troubles. And basically, I forgot, did I not put it in here? He said they spent too much time messing around with girls, with the chayalot. Okay, the officers. Yeah, I'm serious. Listen, Israel. I was just in Israel, as you know, and one place they take you is I went to the Central Army Base. Everybody here knows that Israel drafted women as well. Why? That's a good question. Why? Where'd they get it from? It's not from the old Yishuv. It's not from World War I. Where'd it come from? At the 40s. Okay, in the 40s. Where'd they get it from? Stalin. Well, no, I'm serious. There's a great book that just came out by my favorite contemporary author, Svetlana Alexievich. You've all heard of her, of course, right? Shame on you. She won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year. You should have heard of her. Okay? So, yes. And she's a brilliant author. And what she does is she has this great ability to take interviews and distill them and all the rest of it. And millions of Russian women had to go fight because there was no choice with the Hitler invasion. I'm talking about the combat and the non-combat. And there was, you can imagine what a terrible experience that was. That was a rough experience. And this is a brilliant, just came out, brilliant evocation of all this sort of thing. When in World War II, the Russian women were fighting, Russia didn't say it's a matter of desperate. They said it's egalitarian society. You understand? Israel was in love with Russia during the 40s because the Red Army did defeat Hitler. That's a fact. So they fought very heroically. The Yishuv was nuts over the Red Army. I think some of the Palmach and the others were very leftist, but they're great fighters. And therefore, when the Palmach started, and when the Haganah started, when Israel became a state in 48, they said, we're going to do like Russia, draft everybody. Now, after World War II was over, Russia did not draft the women anymore. But Israel did. So there's a plus and minus to everything, but there's a minus to it. And here's General Kofi saying like this, is everybody spending the time with the Chayalot. Instead of, I'm talking about the generals and the big shots, instead of attending to duty. So this is just a human being sort of situation. I'm sharing this because I wouldn't tell another audience, but I'll say here, The human interactions are what they are. Or are we not in Parshas Vayishlach and about to go to Parshas Vayeshev? And it's had big consequences. Understand? Now, it's not as simple as that, but here's General Kofi, the commander-in-chief on the Golan Heights, talking about this in the immediate aftermath of the war. And he's obviously a Chiloni. By Friday, the war starts on Saturday. By Friday, the day before Yom Kippur, the Egyptians cannot believe their luck. Here's the Egyptian General Shazli saying, I saw the Israelis did nothing. I said, now it's...
The attack was due on Saturday, October 6th. On the Friday, I went down and looked across the canal. On the other side, nothing was moving. I went back and told Sadat, they can find out now. I don't care.
Now, actually, notice he's saying it's too late to do anything about it. It's not exactly true, okay? That's the sad or interesting sort of business over here. But the Egyptians said, we've gone so far. It depends whose general was in there. I can tell you right now, here's another tragic coincidence. Until 3 months before, who was the commander on the Suez Canal? The answer is Sharon. And then he retired. The guy after him was a disaster. You can like Sharon or not like Sharon. As a general, he's first class in a combat. I'm sure if he would be there and see all this, they wouldn't have the script. They would have had the army up where they needed to be in the right time. And even the day before, there was time to move up. Even on the day it happened, as we'll see, there was time to move up. But this was not done. There were other signs that started to happen on Friday, like the evacuation of the Soviet families. All of a sudden, from Egypt and Syria, big Russian airplanes show up, and every Soviet civilian and family get on the plane and go back to Russia. What does that mean? The Russians say, we're not endangering our people. There's a great book I got years ago at the Biblo. As you can see in the title, is by a Soviet diplomat. What did it look like from the Kremlin during the Yom Kippur War? Victor Israelian, who's not Jewish. And it's very fascinating. And I remember he said like this, he was working in the Kremlin. And he said like this, he says, the Russians said, there's going to be a war, get our people out of here. And they said, well, you'll be giving away to the Israelis, this is a surprise attack. And Gromyko said like this, the lives of our people are more important to us than an Arab attack. You know? Doesn't have to do with that. I'm going to get Russian people. Because it's funny, the Russians are brutal, but also not. And after World War II, they said, we're going to lose any more people. So if you're Israel, you say, yes, there's a warning sign. I mean, the Russians are pulling everybody out. What's that? Okay? Even that did not move the military intelligence analysts. They said, we're still sure it's a blow. The war started on Saturday afternoon. The day before, in the middle of Thursday night, Friday, in the middle of the night, Ashraf Marwan shows up in London, and he says, I have to talk to the head of Mossad, Zamir, right, John Zamir, and Mordechai Zamir. And what happens over here? They're going to have a spy meeting in the middle of the night. Well, not exactly middle of the night. It's not like today with the cell phones. You got to arrange this, okay? But so what happens? In the middle of the night, he comes to London. He calls up. He says, I have to have a meeting with your top guy. It's about chemicals. By the time Zamir gets the message in Tel Aviv and starts to understand its import, it's 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning Israel time. So it's 3 in the morning before Friday morning. Okay? Thursday night. In the middle of the night or Friday morning. Okay. He says, if this is about chemicals, I got to go. Because that's the code word for a war. So it takes a while, though, to get from Tel Aviv to London. So he's on the plane to London from Tel Aviv airport about 6 in the morning. So how long does it take to get to London? 3-4 hours? I don't know, something like that. So Zamir doesn't get to London for a couple hours later in the morning, Israel time. This is the day before the war. Meanwhile, Golda Meir is getting nervous, like all this buildup on the borders. She has a security meeting at 10 a.m. Friday morning in her office with the top generals and officials. They do not know tomorrow the Arabs will attack at 2. An hour later, the head of the army, General Elazar, Dada Elazar, declares on his own high alert, like we say, alert number 3. He put the Air Force and the Tzava Keva, the regular army, under war alert. No reserves and all the rest of it. But he's not allowed to call up the Miluim. He's not allowed to call up the reserves without Golda Meir saying okay, without the cabinet giving permission. General Ze'ira, head of the military intelligence, criminally declines to activate the phone taps, and he lies and said they reveal nothing. I'll tell you what it means. Anybody? I bet you a lot of you remember the CIA had this thing under Berlin back in the 50s. Did you ever read about that? Or you don't know what I'm talking about? Yeah. There was a while in the 50s where the CIA was able to tap in the East Berlin phone lines and listen to all the Russian conversations. About a year or so. They got a ton of information until it was exposed. Israel had that in Egypt. But they're always afraid to activate it only for emergency. Now's the emergency. So Moshe Dayan says like this, have you listened in? Because if they would, they hear all the Egyptian generals talking, we're attacking tomorrow. And they didn't. But General Ze'ira said, we activated and there's nothing there. So he lied. Okay? So this is all high treason charges. The guy's still walking today. Nothing ever happened to him. General Ze'ira's still alive. Okay? Now, more meetings are held as Friday progresses. The bottom line, all day Friday, the day before the war, the reserves are not called up. To make matters worse, General Ze'ira says, it's not going to be a war. It might possibly be a raid in force, which would not be a full-scale war. It's something that Israel can handle. They used to call this Yom Krav. Once in a while, they would have a couple of shootouts on the Golan Heights, then it would die down. Once in a while, they have a couple of shootouts on the Suez Canal. In Lebanon, they used to do Yom Krav, a day of battle. It's in and out. This is the worst possible thing, because when the war will actually start, the generals on the front will know, is this a war or the Yom Krav? That'll really, on the Golan Heights, the Chafi will just be all confused. It's the worst possible thing. It's almost like he's working for them. You understand? It's almost like he's working for them. Now, to make matters even worse, the Israeli NSA intercepts a message from the Iraqi ambassador in Moscow back to Baghdad. That code they knew how to crack. And what does he say? He says, the Russians told me they're going to attack tomorrow, Egypt. The military intelligence gets it, but General Ze'ira spikes it. So I'll say again, I know he's not working for them, but I don't understand it. You couldn't do a better job if you were working for them. The bottom line, the whole Friday was a snafu. Israel could have mobilized its reserves that day, which would have made all the difference. Once again, they'd be ready here, they'd be ready, the Egyptians would try to come across, they'd be all blown up. The Syrians would try to come across, they'd be all blown up. But it didn't happen. Friday was a waste. Zamir, the head of the Mossad, if you follow this novel, and the Egyptian spy, Marwan, don't end up getting together until in London, until late Friday at 11:30 at night, which is 10 o'clock in Israel. So it's 10 o'clock in Israel Friday night. Ashraf from one side goes, are you guys nuts? It's tomorrow, baby. The war is happening tomorrow morning. Okay? It's happening tomorrow morning. General Zamir, so I guess, are you absolutely sure? Because I don't want another rubber ducky. Remember we talked about that, the Leah Barvazim. Remember when Israel had a false alert? And it's almost in Ben Gurion's time, it almost caused a war, and Eisenhower said what's going on over here. And the generals who did it got fired. So he doesn't want to get fired also. And Ashraf from one side says, this is a real thing, I am sure. So Zamir, after talking to him, is convinced. But it's midnight Friday night. He leaves, he walks a few blocks away to the Mossad headquarters in London. He sends a message to Israel as soon as he can. Bottom line, Israel doesn't get the message until the middle of the night. Friday night, it's already Yom Kippur. Late night calls result in all the Israeli big shots being aware by 4:30 in the morning of Yom Kippur that the attack is coming that day on Shabbos. They think that the attack will be towards the end of the day, 5:30. So the bottom line is Egypt wanted early, Syria wanted late. They end up compromising at 2. So here we are at 7:30 or so in the morning of Yom Kippur. And later that morning, Shabbos and Yom Kippur, everybody's davening, but don't worry, Golda Meir, these guys don't go to shul. And no. So therefore, they're all at the headquarters, the Pentagon, the Pekiria in Tel Aviv. They're having big, urgent meetings of all the big shots, what to do. I'm just trying to show you, you see the huge role that logistics and human error plays in all these epical events. If only the spy and the Mossad guy would have met a day earlier, one would hope. Already at 4:30 that morning, the commander of the army, General Eleazar, was ready to go to war. He was convinced, this is it, let's do it. But he's just a general. He doesn't have the power to give the final orders for the mobilization of everything. General Eleazar said this, let's mobilize the Israeli Air Force now, the Chel Avir, and do the preemptive strike at 11 in the morning, right? And it can happen. I told you, they had a plan, a hard one, difficult one to pull off, and that is to ballet, I call it. You know, they have all these SAM-6 missiles. There's a certain way, obviously, I don't know, that you fly like this and like that and that, but it has to be done like a choreographed ballet, and they could get under them and beat the system. But we have to go first, and we have to do it in our time. And they're not going to attack till later in the day, so we do it now. And it would have worked, or at least the Israeli experts say it would have worked. Moshe Dayan said, oh, by the way, we also have to mobilize the whole reserves now. It's crazy. They're going to attack at 2 o'clock. It's 7, 8, 9 in the morning, and the Israelis saying, should we mobilize the army or not? Moshe Dayan said, no. All we have is a couple of messages from Tzvika Zamir from London. You understand? So this is Dayan's worst hour, okay? Because he got the information. He said, well, I don't know if it's really true. Okay? Now, Dayan is a funny guy. It was. He hurt his reputation, ruined it in this war. He was brave versus the Arabs, but he was always a pachtan versus the great powers. You understand? That's who Moshe. If you want to get down to details, we could do it, but we won't do it now. He was always scared of America. He was always scared of Russia. Wasn't scared of the Arabs. In this, he was a faithful disciple of David Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was not afraid of the Arabs. He's always scared of America. He's always scared of Russia. How come we have the trouble with the Gaza Strip now? And the answer is, Israel could have conquered the Gaza Strip in Operation Chorev in the beginning of 1949. Truman said, back off, they backed off. It's a very famous case. Okay, it is what it is. And Eisenhower, forced him out of the Sinai in 56. And Moshe Dayan was all part of all that. And so, even in 67, they wouldn't move until Johnson gave the okay, right? So, you can't blame Dayan for being a Ben Gurionist. The general of the army, Eleazar, he's appalled. Now we're ready for the ballet of the planes. Now if it's going to happen, it's going to happen now. Otherwise, they won't be able to do it. Moshe Dayan said no. As happened in 67. In 67, it worked out good. But if you remember, in 67, they wouldn't move until America said yes, yes, yes. If Nasser had attacked first, it would have been a Mapolo. We are just lucky that in 67, Nasser never attacked. You understand? But this time, it didn't work that way. So it was, as I said before, let's go to the next one. He was apparently too close to Nixon and to Kissinger. So as late as Saturday morning is a denial. The general of the army, Eleazar, Dada they call him, he calls the generals on the north and the south. General Gonain in the south and General Chofi in the north. This is happening today, guys. It's happening. They don't believe him. They don't totally believe him. Oh my God. They said, well, okay, we'll make some preparation. They didn't really get this. Golda Meir is appealed to, general of the army, goes to Golda Meir. He says, listen, this is crazy. We got to mobilize everything. And she's stuck. Now, how would you like to be Golda Meir on Yom Kippur morning, And say, I guess, so what do you do? Yachloku. He said, half and half. She says, okay, no ballet, yes, reserves. We'll call it the reserves, but we won't launch a preemptive air attack. That way, it's a politician. She figures, like this, like that. So, and Golda Meir, by the way, thinks they have until 6 that evening to be around then. So here we are, on Yom Kippur, a few hours, as you and I know by hindsight, before the Arabs hit them with everything they got, and Israel has literally their pants down. The Israeli positions on the south reflect that. They all believe the attack will happen today, but at the end of the day. And so the tanks aren't up where they need to be. When the actual attack happens at 2 o'clock, they're not properly deployed. You understand? Little stupid things like that. Imagine here is the canal. The tanks are back here. They got 4 hours. They're getting their ammunition together and the tanks and the fuel and all that stuff. They're getting ready. And if the Egyptians are going to attack at 6, you get there at 5:30 and you'll be ready to blow them out of the water. But they attack at 2. And so this gap of a few hours is of such gigantic importance. And what happens later on, that's unbelievable. This had been the Israeli war plan with the Shavach Yonim. Okay? You have it over there? This had been the Israeli war plan, and they'll be up there at the line when the Egyptians start to cross, and the tanks could have blown them out of the water. I'll tell you again, if Sharon had been there, I'm sure that's what had happened. There was one fort where they had 2 tanks. They got there ahead of everybody else for Budapest. And they knocked out a bunch of Egyptian tanks and armored personnel carriers. If there would have been 100, or even 50 or 60 or 70, it would have been a wreck on the Egyptians. The Egyptians crossed without any opposition. You understand? Now, to be fair, the general in the south, Gonain, screwed up by disbelieving the news. So, that, he said, I guess it's not really happening today anyway, which is just sad. As I said, if only Sharon was there. My friends, the hour is late. To sum up for tonight, Israel, as we see, I'm sorry to say, was guilty of numerous misjudgments and screw-ups at the very top. To the degree that Israel lost the war, it was lost on Friday and Saturday morning, before the first shot was fired. So many mistakes in communication, assessment, personality occurred on the Israeli side that it defies coincidence. One has to say you're dealing with hashgacha pratis in a negative way. As I said, the war was lost by the generals, but then was retrieved by the lower officers, but at a high cost. That is something I hope we'll do next week. Once again, I want to remind everybody who wasn't here at the beginning, we're not going to be in Shomrei next week. We will be on, I'm not sure exactly when. So go to a Hertzberg website or something and we'll find out. And again, if anybody is looking for a sponsorship opportunity, I have stuff for you.